the City of Royal Oak. Before we get started, let's introduce ourselves, starting to my left.
Gary Casada.
Woody Gantina.
Charlene Douglas, City Commissioner.
Mike Fournier, Mayor.
Ann Vara.
Tim Twain, Community Development Director.
And Beaky.
Hey, Marcus with the City Attorney's Office.
Perfect. Okay, item B is the approval of minutes from the December 10th, 2019. Is there a motion to approve?
I motion to approve.
Motion by Ms. Bakey. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Ms. Douglas. Any discussion on these minutes? Okay, not seeing. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Minutes have been approved. Okay, next item is public comment on non-agenda items. Is there anyone here that would like to speak to the Planning Commission on non-agenda items? Okay, not seeing. I'm going to close item C and open it up to item D. This is new business. This is site plan 200101 to expand a metal fabrication plant, Flexing Gate, at 4336 Coolidge Highway. Mr. Twing.
The Planning Commission does have a copy of the staff report, access to it. The site itself is on the northeast corner of Normandy and Coolidge. It is zoned general industrial. The petitioner is proposing basically three separate additions to the Flexing Gate facility. The first is a 3,255 square foot addition to the southeast corner of the building. It's approximately 28 feet in height, 42 feet by 77 feet roughly. The second is 2,500 square feet, also in that corner of the building, roughly 38 feet in height and 50 by 50. And then there's an addition on the north end of the building that's a little over 1,000 square feet in an area, or 40 by 20. That's roughly 34 feet in height for a pump station, as we've outlined in the report. Staff would have considered improving this administratively, other than it exceeds our limit on square footage additions and things. So you'll see we've referenced the prior approval of the site in 2018, which was for a much bigger addition. And some of the conditions that you put in there may or may not be relevant anymore. But what we've referenced in the staff report under item 1 was no changes to placement or operation of the outdoor storage area, and reference those site plan numbers that are relevant to that. The second contingency is related to one of the items that the Planning Commission required under the prior approval for the 65,000 square foot addition that was planned but not done, was you asked for some landscaping to be added in the parking lot area, and that is a discretionary item. So if you were looking to have that back and advisable, you would have to indicate such. And then the other part of that is there appeared to be some distressed plantings along the berms that are in Coolidge and Normandy, and you asked that those be identified and replaced as that part of that approval. Everything else is our standard contingencies regarding fencing details, exterior lighting, any additional signage, and obviously compliance with the city building codes.
Thank you, Mr. Twing. Any questions? I have one. You mentioned that this would have been approved administratively had it not been for the square footage. What was the tipping point?
It's a percentage of the building up to a max, and I'm not sure, I don't recall right off the top of my head what it was, but,
Okay.
but
that's
these are
what did
above
it.
that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is the petitioner here? Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Gary Coe, the architect. My address is 126 East 3rd Street, Rochester. FlexGate is proposing the 3 buildings. One's a pump room, the north side, that's being used to move equipment, and it's used to stabilize the heat for the different applications that they do within the building. The larger of the 2 additions on the back side at the northeast corner is for a warehouse, where they're also going to be bringing in rolls of steel, and they're going to store some of that steel in there, but also the trucks are pulling into that space, so they're out of the public view. And the third is the processing of the scrap metal, which currently is done a little bit on the outside. It's going to be totally enclosed, trying to contain the noise and for the public, as well as shielding it from the general site. All the buildings will be meeting the current codes, zoning ordinance codes, including both the shielding of lights and so forth. I don't know Of course, the scope of this project's a lot less than previously, which came before the Planning Commission back in 2018. And so we're not requesting as much as far as, and again, could have been almost done administratively, but we're trying to downsize the amount of project that's being done here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions for the petitioner?
I guess given the discussion last time and the referenced landscaping, are these areas more out of view than the previous?
They're more out of view than previous, yeah. The other construction was closer to Coolidge itself, what was being proposed at that time. For example, the pump house is about 500 feet off of Coolidge, and the other two buildings are getting close to 800 to 1,000 feet back from the street. Here.
Mayor?
Yeah, so for the, the scrap metal operation sounds like it's existing today, right? And you're just kind of, closing that off, making it maybe a little bit more aesthetically pleasing to neighbors, but as well as, have it indoors, which allows it to operate, quieter, 7 days a week, better for your operators, things of that nature. You don't have to worry about weather and elements. The other two spots where you have the rolled steel, those are new additions to your operation as far as either you're storing it there versus storing it inside. And then I think you have the warehousing, and then, I'm sorry, what was the other?
That is a warehousing.
That is warehousing.
That is a
okay.
warehousing, it's a rolls.
And then you have the pump room
The pump room.
to help regulate temperature throughout the.
Correct.
And those are newer things that you're bringing to the facility.
Well, currently they're in the facility right now,
Okay.
but they're in an area that's currently an outdoor courtyard area that we're enclosing, but that's within the center of the building.
That space inside, as you move those operations to these new locations, is that just in the courtyard cleared up, becomes green space, or is it?
Becomes part of the building for operations.
Okay.
Any other questions for the petitioner? Is there a motion? Ms. Douglas?
Yes, I'll move approval of the proposal.
Is there support? Mr. Casada?
That's with the contingencies that they've
Yes, as
listed.
proposed by staff.
Second.
Okay, supported by Mr. Casada. Any discussion?
Well, for clarity, are you asking for more landscaping in the parking lot area, or are you not?
Well, prior to the motion being put on the table, that was.
Prior approval, when they did 66,000 square feet, you required that the parking lot to the south had some landscaping islands in it. And then the second part of that was replacement of some of the distressed trees and the berms. That really wasn't a staff recommendation. It was a question of, did you still want to make that as part of a contingency going forward?
You mean talking about point number 2?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
Is there any discussion on this motion? I'll make a comment on the landscaping. We talked the last time about the berms and how it's difficult for trees to survive on top of a small berm. So I'm not sure where your company landed with that, if you were gonna, when you addressed the trees, if you were gonna remove the berms, or I just wanted to bring that up again, that when you're considering that issue, it's difficult for trees to survive in that limited environment. So I just wanted to make that comment.
All right, hold on 1 second. You want to come here and address it?
Tom Wickman, 4336 Coolidge Highway, Flexing Gate. No, Ms. Farr, we didn't have an intention of modifying those berms at this time.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any other discussion? Not seeing, we'll call for the vote. All those in favor say aye. 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 Any opposed? Okay, you're approved.
Thank you. Good luck.
Okay. Okay, next item, this is other business. This is a sign variance, 200101, to request to replace a fuel canopy sign, or fuel canopy signs and other signs while maintaining non-conforming wall and window signs for automobile filling station and convenience store at 4738 Rochester Road with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 waivers. I'll let you talk about that.
Decipher
Mr.
them?
Twain. Yes, thank you.
Well, based on the building department's review and denial, there are 2 fuel canopies on the site, depicting a picture of what was represented as an existing configuration. There's a west fuel pump canopy and a north fuel pump canopy, as we're referencing. A and B are in regards to the west one. C and D are in regards to the north canopy. They are basically the same waiver based on proposed signage for those 2 canopies. Canopy signage is maxed out at 8 square feet on the facade area, and they're either proposing to waive 11.69 square feet or 72.75 square feet off of those in order to have the proposed signage that's depicted on the canopies here. The second major variant, or the second item I would point out, is the E, or in regards to the fuel pumps, depiction of the fuel pump. And then as proposed, the building department has determined that the signage on the depiction of the Sunoco and some of the signage is not compliant and is considered commercial branding on each fuel pump. And so there's a listing there of under item E of a need to waive 12.6 or 0.16 square feet of commercial branding on each of the fuel pumps. Item F is in regards to the wall signs, and that there would be 2 wall signs remaining on the west front facade. That's basically the Marlboro sign at the end that I'm kind of circling, and then the lottery sign that's on the left-hand side of your picture, or is depicted in this photo as well as part of your packet. The last item G is in regards to the window signage. All of the window signage that you see on both the west facade as well as the north side, they're basically covering 100% of the window panels. The sign ordinance limits them to 15%. So they're asking in this case to waive 204 square feet of window signage on the west facade, or 99.22 square feet on the north facade. The 204 was on the west facade. So those are the variances that are listed item A through G. I tried to keep it simple. I would also point out that in the packet there is, and on the site, there is a freestanding sign. That sign does comply with the code requirements. In the last part, initially, they had submitted a proposal to include merchandising unit signs, but those have been removed. And so that part of the building department's letter wasn't included in the variance. So
Thank you.
I think that's a summary.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Twain? Ms. Douglas?
Talk a little bit more about the branding issue as opposed to signs. I mean, how does that differ?
Well, the way the sign ordinance is written in regards to gas stations, it's a little different in they get wall sign. They get one wall sign on the building. They've got a minimum of a certain amount for canopy signs. And then as far as fuel pumps, it's restricted to items labeling and safety and hazardous issues. So anything that isn't falling in that regard, they're going to consider branding. If that's a short answer.
So, and continuing, so the signs they have right now on their canopies are already non-compliant. And how did they wind up that way?
I don't have a really good, I don't know that, well, I'm not sure. I don't know.
Was this pre-changes to the?
Yeah. And again, under the sign ordinance, there is nothing that's considered non-conforming that gets to keep. It amortizes it out. So the fact it may have complied at the time that it was built, and when the new sign ordinance was written, it didn't anymore. And so when they go to change it, they've got to either get it in compliance or get a variance.
Got it.
So, but I don't know. I have the past record on this.
All right, thank you.
I do remember there was a Sunoco station on Woodward, I think.
We have an Amico.
Was that Amico?
We had, like,
I remember
within
we had
last
something
year.
that had the NASCAR signage and all of that.
No, it's at Crooks and 12.
Was that the one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wondered if it was the Sunoco's branding.
It is, yeah.
Okay. Because it was on the pumps for that one, too. I wasn't even remember, I just remember
You're right.
the color. Any other questions for Mr. Twing? Is the petitioner here? Welcome.
Hi, thank you. I'm Terrence Salch with Neighbor Sign Company at 359 Livernois in Ferndale, Michigan. We, for all the reasons that you had indicated, we'd been secured by the petroleum company to rebrand this site Sunoco. It had been recently re-signed for an extension in its contract, and therefore part of that agreement was to refresh the site's image. And with that, we were literally going through like for like with the entire image. So if you look at the graphics package that we have proposed that meets Sunoco brand standards, it is exactly what is there now. It's just new. So in our diligence, we submitted for applications to replace what's there, and we're denied. So we want to basically refresh the station. They've signed a long-term contract. We want to keep it like it looks now. It won't impact the community any differently. It looks exactly like that, but it will be new. So we're asking for your support.
Thank you. Any questions for the petitioner? Mr. Casada?
What about the window sides? Those aren't Sunoco branding, are they?
That's the station owner's window. They manage their windows, and that is, I did talk to them about that. That is very important to them. It's actually a window perf, and you can see through it from the inside and not into the station from the outside. They like the look, and they do like the opportunity to. It looks like a store that way, and they like that. They want to maintain that.
There isn't window trim LEDs on this one, is there?
No, it's a tasteful. I mean, this group has been in the community for over 40 years. They're well established. They run a very nice station. We actually. I think it was 15 years ago we put the sign up that's there, and when they signed last time was Sunoco. So it's they plan on staying in the community and have been a good, they've made improvements. That site looked a lot different 15 years ago. It was an old service type station with bays and such, and at some point they've came, after we were there, they came and went through and made it a nice convenience store. They maintain it, and no, they don't have the gaudy lights around the windows.
Any other questions for the petitioner? Is there a motion on this? Mr. Casada?
Yes. Well, a little bit of discussion first. I sympathize with the fact that we're just trying to take the same branding and upgrade it. I'm also sympathetic to the fact that the corporate branding is part of what you sign up for. I don't think the window signs are something that can possibly meet any of the criteria for granting a variance, so I'm going to make a motion that to approve the sign variance, except that the window signs have to come into conformance. That's my motion.
Mr. Casada, just for clarification, so you're just addressing item G that has to come into compliance?
Yes.
And the motion is to approve A through F?
Yes.
Okay. Is there support on that? Support by Mr. Gantina. Any discussion? Ms. Douglas?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, I like to be consistent, and so I'm sitting here looking on Google Maps at the other Sunoco station at 12 and Crooks, and this is a Google image dated last June, and it has sort of this new branding, but not. And I'm trying to figure out what we did with them, if we allowed them to keep those signs, because the Amico station on Woodward, they went ahead and did it. They had installed new signs and had to pull them back to be consistent with our sign ordinance. But looking at the Sunoco station at 12 Mile, I'm trying to figure out if we ever, and Mr. Twing is silent over there.
I don't have a specific recollection. The only way I could do is go back and check, but.
So.
Any other, Ms. Beakey?
I think this is a little bit challenging because, again, on the one hand, to grandfather in something that has a similar look, I can understand that, again, from the business owner's perspective, that would be the easiest and be consistent. And I agree about the window signs with Mr. Casada. However, again, given that we've been trying to be stricter about being consistent with other decisions, I wonder if it would be worthwhile even just to table this to be able to look at those other ones, because I'd hate to say that on one hand, I don't think I was already on the commission for the one you're talking about. We asked people to take down signs, and on the other hand, allow these to go forward if they're a similar case. That,
I'm going to make a comment on this. We've seen probably about 3 or 4 McDonald's examples that have come through us in the last several months, and it's all because of grant branding, and we've granted, I think, just about every one of them. Same thing with RVs, although we did have them pull down the sign on Woodward. So, I don't think, I'm not prepared to argue a branding issue, and I think the site looks good. I would support Mr. Casada's motion about the window signs, but I do have a question for Mr. Twing. If they didn't have that in the windows, could they put something else? If they, is it because it's...
Well, they can cover 15% of the window with signage.
Okay, but not...
Not 100%.
100%, okay. So they could replace those with something else, but up to 15%?
Right.
Okay. Okay, that's good, thank you.
According to the ordinance.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? Just a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Excuse me. If I understand correctly, with regard to how much of the windows can be blocked, the idea is that you have that openness to the public view, right? As far as that's why the ordinance is in place in terms of
To have sight lines and see in and see out, and not have a stark wall.
I found the date of the last one on Crooks, which was the June 22nd, 2018 Planning Commission. You guys will bear with
They
me.
went back and dug into them.
Got Google hands tonight. Planning Commission, maybe it was let's see. Maybe it was on June.
They go to minutes rather than the agenda.
Yeah, the letter said, I gotta go to minutes. Why will it not show me the minutes? I gotta go to our special meeting minutes. That's why.
Ann?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
While you're doing that, I
Sorry.
just want to make a comment in response to the comment about the reason for the window,
Which meeting are you at?
15%. There probably was a safety and a light issue.
2018?
But to my mind, sign clutter is also an issue. And I'll say that I appreciate the NASCAR motif, but the building itself is looking like a NASCAR vehicle full of advertisements, and I think it's too much sign clutter. I think that's one of the reasons for the ordinance. And so, despite the fact that the signs can be seen through in one direction, I think they're not meeting the purpose of the ordinance, which I think is beneficial to the community. And I mean, do you want to make the station look 22nd? NASCAR, not NASCAR branded, that's fine. I think what you've done, what you're proposing is tasteful, except for the window signs.
Thank you, Mr. Casada.
10th meeting.
Any other comments? The mayor is trying to, did you find it?
Found the meeting. Found the letter.
This is the one we're looking at.
I'll give some comments while, we're kind of looking at it. I think I've had a pretty, I think in the past, from what I remember, is we haven't been, as long as size and dimension doesn't become overburdensome, with some of these, what I'll call reskinning of the signs. My recollection on previous, things before us is that we've always seemed to be a little bit more lenient, especially for, unique situations where you have canopies and things of that nature, where it's not, a sign on the wall and we're littering the building. It's really a unique, operation, being a service station, and, keeping the status quo has sort of been on some of these canopies. I do know that we've made moves to Mr. Casada's point when it relates to window signage, and we've, approved things conditionally on cleaning up some of the window signage for, aesthetic reasons, and so that is also something we've done. But I believe on this one,
You waived
Crooks.
You waived a height of they had a freestanding sign and you waived a foot, roughly. You waived a little bit of square footage on the freestanding sign. You granted 16.29 square feet of the maximum canopy sign area on one of the canopy signs. You waived 22.83 square feet on the other canopy sign. You allowed the prohibited sign type on a fuel pump to extend beyond the roof structure. And you basically allowed the fuel pump to have the commercial signage rather than the safety signage. Those are the only ones you granted on that.
What did we not do in that case?
Pardon me?
What did we not grant in that particular case? And that was another status quo from what I remember. The signs were...
That was A through F. I would say since there's no denial, you granted them all.
Okay.
With some modifications, sounds like.
Now, that particular property, I'm not sure it had the window signage issue, though, if you go to the...
Probably didn't have a window.
I don't remember that.
Had some
for
windows,
that
but it's
one.
not, it's kind of like an old mechanic shop base versus a newer retail.
Mr. Casada?
And I just also want to recall that on Woodward, we did grant a sign variance for that one new station that had several different several different food service in there. And one of the conditions we said is you can't put window signs on at all, I think we said. They haven't. It looks much better that way. I think it's
That's exactly what I was
That's
thinking.
correct. Yep. Ms. Douglas, I'm sorry.
What I recall from the other one is that we looked at the sign of the canopy that has NASCAR and then kind of the rainbow, and sort of felt that the rainbow, even though the building department classifies that as a sign, that the rainbow to us was an artistic element, and that the sign there was really just the NASCAR lettering. I think that's how we interpreted it.
Yeah, no offense to the Sunoco. Not that we're supposed to read signs and we don't read signs, and that doesn't fit into our criteria. But if one were to look at a rainbow, it's pretty. I wouldn't know that would be Sunoco versus nothing against the Sunoco branding, but I wouldn't know the difference.
Any other discussion on this motion?
So it's basically to approve A through F and deny G.
Yes, it's made by Mr. Casada, supported by Mr. Gantina. No other discussion, let's call for the vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Madam Chair, I apologize. I have this has overcome me just in the past 10 minutes. I'm so sorry.
Okay, well, I'll look for a lifesaver while we're
Yeah.
moving on to item 2 under other business. This is a preliminary review of potential zoning ordinance text amendments on lot size, density, off-street parking, and other standards for multiple family dwellings. This is for you, Mr. Hwy?
Yes, I'll give it a lead in. Doug's here, so it's twofold. He coordinated putting all this together and can get into giving you a brief overview. Let me first start out by saying there's no intent from staff tonight to ask you to take any action on this. We're here to field questions if you have any and make sure it's heading in the right direction. And if you want to schedule more time at another meeting to talk about it, that's fine. But this is basically in regards to prior Planning Commission discussions and requests. You'll remember back in August 13th meeting in 2009, we gave you a staff report that looked at densities that were currently out there and had been approved in terms of also parking, design standards, and so on. To show you what actually had been built and what the community was made up of. We also suggested there were several things in the ordinance regarding multifamily and mixed-use developments that we would suggest that you look at from a standpoint of the developments that have been approved either got variances or they were went through a PUD or a conditional rezoning that was eventually approved to waive certain provisions. And from a staff administrative standpoint, if we're constantly waiving provisions because the community feels that's the appropriate thing, then those provisions should get modified so that we don't have to go through those steps. The downside to that, then we would ask you that you hold fast to those and not grant waivers beyond those, because as you allow more density, developers have a tendency to want to pile more on and maybe ask for another waiver above and beyond that. So in the outline here, I think Doug's done a good job on the sense of starting out with some of the bullet point items that were talked about at the last meetings that are addressed in the very preliminary ordinance revisions, and then he's got it broken up by each section with a staff commentary on those sections and what they meant and how they went forward. I think I'll let him run through it very briefly, because I just kind of want to get your input or questions and feel. And again, there's no intent to ask you to set this for a public hearing next month or anything else. We'd be happy to bring it back and talk about it again next month or at some sort of work session, because there is a lot here.
Yeah, or maybe break it into pieces, smaller pieces.
Yeah.
Focus on a little bit each time.
If you want to give a brief overview, it'd be great.
Yeah, sure. What we were tasked with was looking at modifications to the zoning ordinance for, as Tim has said, the lot size, the density, and off-street parking standards for multiple family dwellings, specifically to address the bullet points that are on the front page of the memo, which were the result of our discussions at the regular meeting of last August. The text amendments as drafted wound up being quite a bit more extensive than may have been initially realized because of when we change standards in one zoning district, we wind up affecting several other districts. Multiple family dwellings are not just limited to the multiple family residential zoning district. They are allowed in all of our commercial zoning districts, and they are allowed in both of our mixed-use zoning districts. Some of those districts refer back to the standards in multiple family residential. So when we change standards in one district, we wind up having to change standards in several other zoning districts. As a result, the proposed text amendments, there came to be a lot more extensive than may have originally been realized. Well, what I attempted to do was list the bullet points from the last meeting and then give a description of what zoning ordinance sections would then need to be modified to deal with that bullet point. What I also tried to do was create a summary table at the end of the report that shows what, of all the text amendments that are listed, what the section is that would be modified, what the current standard is, and what's proposed, to give maybe a brief overview of all of the changes that would be necessary. As I said, there wound up being quite a few of them. It says because when we change the standard for multiple family dwellings in one district, it has a snowball effect and then affects those standards in other zoning districts as well. I don't think, since there's quite a bit of a get into the specific language of it, but if there are any specific revisions or additions that you see that you would like to have included, or possibly something to be taken out, we'd be happy to hear that now. But again, it may be necessary to set up a work session to go over it, or possibly break it into separate ordinance amendments and deal with them separately as much as we can, because the ones affecting specifically density and lot sizes for multiple family zoning districts will include addition or amendments to several other zoning districts as would be necessary. So otherwise, we're going to wind up with inconsistent standards. Having one set of standards for multiple family dwellings in one zoning district and another set in another. So, well, again, why it became so extensive was we need to get those standards consistent in all zoning districts.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Hedges? Lots of questions. Ms. Beakey?
Well, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. I was going to say that you can take it in bits and pieces if you'd like. I would, as Doug kind of reiterated, I wouldn't go through the process of trying to adopt portions of it because you can see that it impacts multiple areas. But if you want to go through and review it 2 or 3 pages at a time or something, if that makes sense, or sections at a time, and then when we're all done, we'll set it for a public hearing and got all your input, and then we'll go through the approval process. Because it does impact back and forth, and we're talking about heights of some buildings in various areas, and while we've suggested certain numbers, primarily, and again, I'll touch on the heights, is we've seen a lot of buildings that are basically limited to 3 stories, but how those are constructed and how they're put together has changed. A lot of them are now using much higher first floors so that they can either be more of a loft configuration, or so in the past you may have had 3 floors, at each one of them are at 10 feet, but now it's not uncommon to get 11, 12, or even 14-foot first floors, and then that drives the same 3-story building up to slightly over 30 feet, which is the current limit, which meant every one of those had to go through some sort of variance for 3, 2, 4 feet, and I can't think of one of those that hasn't been granted in the last, 10 years. So it's a provision that frankly doesn't make a lot of sense in every commercial district. It's a provision that is in the one-family residential for single-family homes, so you're limiting based on that. So some of those heights, we've suggested changes, again, not significantly, but to just get over that 3-story issue that we've run into, to allow some flexibility on the spacing of those floors from a design standpoint. And you'll see that throughout. We've added some definitions in the first part of this to deal with what's meant by a zone district. So you can look at some of those and see if you have questions on those. Setbacks, I think we cleaned up language in most of the districts and made them a little more consistent. So I don't want to go on if you have questions about other things, but I don't know how you want to proceed.
I could, for the commission's benefit and that of the public too, probably highlight the biggest change that it's proposed in there, and that is the density for multiple family projects in multiple family residential zoning district. The existing standard is a minimum lot area of 9,000 square feet for the first 2 units, plus 3,000 square feet for each additional unit. What we have proposed is reducing that to 6,000 square feet for the first 2 units and 1,500 additional square feet for each additional dwelling unit.
Let me interrupt because I don't know if you were going to say it, but that was based on the prior analysis. So.
That was based on the first, it was based on our prior analysis of how many existing multiple family properties in the city were non-conforming, which was just about all of them. This would bring a significant number of those into compliance. The other thing we realize is the density that would be allowed as far as the number of units per acre with the proposed standard is actually equal to what is currently allowed in mixed-use 1 and mixed-use 2 zoning with the maximum available density bonus. So, and it's also consistent with most recent planned unit developments and conditional zoning applications that have had multiple family dwellings as part of that project. So that number that we're proposing is actually consistent with what the commission's been approving over the last several years for most projects.
Well, and the bigger thing to me, it's consistent with projects or multifamily that have existed for 30 years.
Yeah.
That's the bigger,
right?
not what you approved in the last 10, but.
So another way to put it, what we're doing is maybe the standard of, let's say, 9,000 in this case, really was something that would create a situation where we'd have inconsistencies among all of our, two-family residential, for example. And what we're saying is, hey, ever since these things have been built, we take all the stock that we have, they're all non-compliant, and if we do 6,000 square feet, then they are compliant. So future buildings will actually be consistent with existing buildings and meet the harmony of the neighborhoods as they stand today. Makes sense.
Well, in the 1,500, the reduction from 3,000 to 1,500 helps that too.
Yeah.
Not just the 9 to 6. But.
So you don't get new projects in there that are completely like, where did this come from?
You got any more?
That was
I think the other one to touch on is the parking.
Yeah, the other big change would be the required off-street parking for multiple family dwellings. Right now, the minimum requirement is 2 spaces per unit, which is the same as what we require for single-family housing and for duplexes. There is a reduction in the central business district of 1.5 spaces per unit. The number that's proposed for just changing from multiple family dwellings only would be 1.3 spaces per unit. Again, that number comes from the prior analysis of our existing multiple family properties throughout the city, most of which don't meet the 2.0 spaces per unit, but a significant number would comply at 1.3 spaces per unit. And also, again, that number, 1.3 spaces per unit, is consistent with most recent PUDs and conditional rezonings that have included multiple family projects. So it's consistent with what multiple family properties that were built here 30 plus years ago, and it's also consistent with the projects you've been reviewing lately that have sought a way around the 2 spaces per unit standard through a PUD or a conditional rezoning.
Yeah, Ms. Douglas.
So how do these ideas comport with trends across the country, or at least in comparable communities to ours? What are we seeing, especially in terms of density and building height and particularly the parking requirement?
The parking requirement I can address. Most multiple family developers that I've seen and in discussion with other colleagues throughout the country is the standard they use is 1.3 spaces per unit for in planning and for what they propose in development. Developers would look for that are developments in areas where off-street parking is necessary to provide 1.3 spaces per unit. Anything more than that, they consider to be excessive and avoid. I don't necessarily compare it to what other communities around us do because it varies wildly. It'd be difficult to try to peg an average of what other surrounding communities would require because it just varies so much. Same with the density figure. It's the standards vary so much that trying to find an average out of there and see how it compares would be difficult. So instead we tried to focus in on the numbers we were looking at as what would be appropriate for Royal Oak based on one, existing properties, and two, current development projects that have been reviewed by the commission.
Yeah, just so continuing, one of the things I noticed was that, well, first of all, I think we need to discuss at the end of this how we are going to make sure that affected people, residents, property owners, developers, builders know about this so that we can, make sure they come in for a robust public comment session, feedback session. So, I've got some specific notes. One question is, we do not allow residential in industrial areas.
No.
No. Why not?
That I can't answer specifically. I wasn't around when the initial zoning ordinance was adopted in 2000 or its predecessor in 1957. I believe that was consistent, but most communities don't that I'm aware of.
I think it goes back to the types of other uses that are allowed in general industrial that would be not compatible with residential, that may generate complaints. We allow a variety of very intense industrial operations. Whether we have them or not in Royal Oak is another question, but it's generally where they're permitted to occur under some types of approvals. We've had propane gas facilities that aren't necessarily the safest things to have next to homes. We've had, proposals for crematoriums where you may or may not want to be next door to those. So there are uses in general industrial that are allowed that you may not want to let homes next to for those reasons.
Health, safety,
that separation.
And yet I can envision parts of our city where we see around the country, that there is an interest in industrial lofts. People want to live in that environment, go into it with their eyes open, knowing what's next door or could be next door. So I guess I would be willing to, hear what my fellow commissioners have to say and be willing to entertain that possibility. Another comment is that as we look at the features or credits that developments might be asked for in exchange as concessions, I think there's a much longer list than just LEED certification, et cetera. And I don't know if we want to suggest those ideas, because the minute you make that list of ideas, there are other ideas that we didn't think of. But I guess I would want to know that the Planning Commission could be creative in identifying credits. I'm thinking of public art, asking developers to put public art on their building, public spaces, benches, bike repair stations, ride-sharing space. This is going to be an issue in Royal Oak soon. In fact, it's an issue now. So that might be an amenity that a property might offer as a concession. And accessibility. I want to see more residences have accessibility features, and that includes no stairs or elevators, and I would like to see us offer incentives to encourage those kinds of features in the buildings that we host here. And I mean, I can see us making those sorts of amenities an option in a PUD approval as well. So I'd like to see us get creative about that.
If I may just interject
Go ahead.
on that
Yep.
part. I think this will be interesting because I think one of the priorities we're going to talk about for the commission in the upcoming strategic planning session is a community benefits guideline. I know we talked about it maybe a few months ago, and we have staff working kind of on it, I imagine, kind of pulling everything together. And this is a case example that we brought up that, okay, you have this community benefits thing. You know, we talk about art, we talk about environmentally sustainable practices. We talk about veteran housing with some of these multiple families that come in, transition housing, things of that nature. You know, where is that catalog of things that, you know, we don't, and I'm guilty. They've been up here before and I've said, well, you know, tell you what, you can get my vote if you plant 4 more trees and deal with stormwater. You know, we've all done it, all of us. But to have that list like Commissioner Douglas is talking about, and how does it, maybe it's a reference into this document, so that list can be continually updated by the city commission with input from planning, zoning, whomever, but where we have this living, breathing thing that, you know, tells anybody who's coming to our community and is looking for any sort of variance, any sort of special consideration, that these elements here are something that, you know, you should have in your plan in order to, you know, make sure that the community benefit is clear, articulated, and assertive, so you know, the city benefits from whatever variance you're looking for.
And even though we cannot dictate conditions of a conditional zoning, we can certainly tell people who want to seek conditional
Voluntarily
zoning,
update.
you know, show them a list of what's possible.
Yep.
So those are some of the ideas that I want to see us address as we go forward.
I have a comment regarding the industrial question. I think it's an interesting one. I liked Mr. Twing's answer because I think it's appropriate, but there's different kinds of industrial areas, so I'm not sure if there's one size fits all for all industrial. So perhaps when we have that discussion, we look at our industrial areas and maybe start to, you know, dissect that and break that out. And maybe there would be
We
areas.
only have one industrial zoning
But
district.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Maybe we can tier that somehow. I don't know. It might be a bit too big of an issue, but if we're going to look at something that Ms. Douglas suggested, which I think is intriguing, because that is the truth. There are people that seek those particular areas, those loft-type areas, and they like that type of living. But you may not want to be next to a flexing gate.
Right.
Or industrial that could have a 24-hour operation where there's lights and cars going all the time. So that was my comment.
And you may not want them next to grow facilities and processors if you're going to let.
And then again, you might.
And then again, you might.
Convenient shopping.
Still plating, stamping.
There.
And I'll just add, when it relates to that, I mean, they, just like today, they can always come and petition, you know, the commission, planning commission, zoning, whatever they need to say, hey, I have an idea. I'd like to build a residential unit here in this industrial area. Let me tell you about my neighbors. You know, I have a, you know, paint warehouse and, you know, I don't know, another
suppression,
fire
propane.
that's open 8 to 5, and we think that this is going to be fine. And you know, then you have the ability to consider those individually as they pop up for our small remaining industrial area.
Ms. Beakey.
Very good work. I think this is interesting to read through, and it's, again, a lot of different moving parts, which I have a lot of respect for all the hard work on this. Can I ask just one clarification? I have a couple of points, but the first clarification, is there, in office zoning, is that also no residential, similar to industrial?
Correct. Right now, there's no residential uses allowed in office service zoning or general industrial zoning.
Those are the only two?
Yeah, all other zoning district allows some form of residential use.
And wherever there's a single family, one family zone, that the multifamily is excluded from those zones as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, multiple family dwellings are specifically excluded in one-family residential and two-family residential.
Okay, one family residential. And the one family overlays as well?
Yes and no. There are some provisions in the one-family residential overlay for existing for multiple family buildings that existed when that overlay district was created.
Okay. I guess the comments, I understand very well. I think the idea of reducing the lot size that you're mentioning to accommodate the way things have been built. I guess my issues that I am curious about or still concerned about, I'm okay with the idea of potentially going to those 10-foot setbacks on the side of the mixed, the multifamily. I personally, again, especially where you would have buffer zones between different areas, I'm not sure that like a one-size-fits-all does work throughout the city, and I have to look really much more closely at the zoning map to understand this, but that would be a point that I'd really want to take up, is to have some visuals on those buffers, because that 10-foot versus 25 is such a drastic difference for the person who would live next door. Like if you, if we don't have, if you have a business on one side and then you have a residential next to it, again, that privacy factor and things I think has a big, is influenced a lot by that setback. And similarly, as I've said many times, when I think of a buffer zone, lawn is the most basic. I like much better if it's trees and bushes and those kinds of things. And so I guess that's an area that I want to explore carefully. And when I see the 5-foot minimum, which I guess is the fire standard, I personally think a 10-foot minimum would be better between buildings. Again, just because, as I mentioned before, when we think about Royal Oak's evolution from the mid-1800s till now, it used to be covered or surrounded by farmland and such, and we aren't anymore. And so the more that we intersperse green space between our structures, the better we offset that sea of cement and other things. So that's one area I'd like to think about a little bit more. I have a question regarding sidewalk widths. Other than our standard sidewalk that, again, when you go by a person's house, do we have other sidewalk widths in different zones to think about? Again, setback from cars, setbacks to make it easier for groups of people to walk, because in a central business zone, the width of the sidewalk is quite different than when you're just walking past, taking your dog for a walk down a street. And I looked at some other examples where the sidewalk width is part of it, because I think part of my concern about setbacks of the buildings is related also to the passageways, which is related to the sidewalks. And I just didn't see anything about sidewalks in here, so I was curious what that is. And then we don't have yet in Royal Oak any transit-oriented development zones, and I feel like along Woodward we probably should, or near our bus station. And so that's a question I have as we look at, again, bringing things up to date. And from a multimodal perspective and getting people, the mayor walked here today, good job, to use other modes, I would, as we look at parking, I'd feel very happy with, at least in the community benefits, but maybe even as an obligation, that there be some established bike parking, covered bike parking when there's covered car parking. Or in parking lots, make it a requirement for every, I don't know what the ratio would be, 20 cars you're parking, you should be able to park 5 bikes. Because when a family wants to go somewhere and they want to go on their bikes, 3 or 4 or 5 people, a lot of time bike racks only have 1 or 2 racks, and that's not very conducive to people doing that kind of outing. So farmers markets, stuff like that. So bike parking. Anyway, those are my main. But again, overall, I think...
I'll make a couple brief comments on that. I want to make it clear we're only addressing the multifamily zoning district and the impact on that. If we're, and nothing against talking about TOD or other ordinance provisions, but that's a broader topic and a broader item than what was brought previously and what's brought here. The intent of this was to address primarily multifamily, and as Doug said earlier, it spun off into having to address some provisions in other zoning districts, but it was not the intent to rewrite and create new zoning districts at this point. That's a much bigger exercise and a much bigger task. So, and there are TOD provisions in the master plan, and there are areas that have been identified for transit-oriented development in the master plan. We haven't created a district for them, from the idea that probably a PUD or a conditional rezoning, how they would get it at those locations.
But how do we encourage people to do it as far as developers if they?
Most of them we've had conversations with will want to get more density, want to get more of it, and then when they come to this body and to the city commission, that's your opportunity to either require or make them do certain things that you want, and we can push it on there. Every site's a little different. But my only point was this exercise was really not intended to address things outside the multifamily. Setbacks, I think what we can do to comfort you there is maybe give you some illustrations of what those mean, graphic illustrations, and what it means impact-wise. Sidewalk widths are generally, obviously, public sidewalks are in a public right-of-way, and if somebody builds up to their property line, the sidewalk is going to be its width based on the right-of-way. So downtown, where the main streets, where the right-of-way is much bigger, we're able to get somewhere between 13 feet and 20 feet in some cases, but it's driven by where somebody owns property to and so on. If we try to put public sidewalks on a private property, we always got to get an easement from them and then who's maintaining it. But anyways, bike parking we can deal with and that sort of stuff. But I think to go back to your question on setbacks, I think the best way to deal with that is to show you a few illustrations of what it means.
I'm envisioning on some of the setbacks. I mean, I get what staff is saying, Mr. Hedges and Mr. Twing, about, like, even today with the 25-foot setback, you have a driveway, they put a 10-foot driveway in, and then they plant a little bit of grass near the building and maybe put a fire hydrant there or something, you know what I mean? So you're not really getting that landscape buffer. Maybe it's one of these cases where it's an either or, and if you go with the 10-foot, which could permit, a redesign of the property, which allows for green infrastructure, maybe in the back of the property where, you can get on one side of the street with a 10-foot, and then you have a much better, every property is a little unique, and maybe it's, hey, if you elect to do the 10-foot, then you have to have these, amenities on the property to, accommodate stormwater management, whatever it may be. Because you also have, if you're close to another property, you have some runoff issues as well and things like that. So if we can direct to green infrastructure with the 10-foot, that might be something we actually, instead of just community benefits, maybe we can do an either or just to address those concerns.
I can maybe address some part of it regarding the reducing the side yard setback in multiple family residential from 25 feet to 10 feet is done to encourage more multiple family development and to be consistent with other zoning districts. That's the only zoning district that we currently require a 25-foot side yard setback.
Yeah.
No other commercial zoning district, if it has a side yard setback adjacent to residential zoning, it's a 10-foot setback that's required.
Actually, yeah.
But multiple family, we now require a 25-foot. So it was mostly to just make it more consistent with the other zoning districts and to encourage a more consistent development pattern.
That's actually a really good point.
Well, why was it originally 20 foot? Oh, you don't know either. Okay, that's fine.
Maybe to reduce the number of multifamilies in Royal Oak at one time, maybe.
But no, currently the multiple family zoning district is the only one with a constant setback, front, side, or rear. It's all 25 feet. That's the only zoning district we have like that. All the others specify separate required setbacks for front yards, for side yards, and for rear yards.
Mr. Casada?
Yeah, I just want to also say I appreciate the work that the department did here. It's very thorough, and the reasoning that you set forth is well presented. I like the idea of conforming the zoning ordinance to itself and to the practices that we've engaged in, both on this commission and out in the public. I do have a couple of questions and comments. I won't do too many, but one of the things that interested me is that the building heights that was brought up. So if the residential can be 36 is proposed, and then 56 for non-residential, but there's a comment in here that the Planning Commission would still be able to address issues if the adjacent property was adversely impacted. But you're talking about additional height beyond the 36 proposed and beyond the 56
That's
proposed.
in the mixed-use zoning districts where right now the Planning Commission has the authority to grant additional building height, and there's certain conditions.
Okay, but we would set it now at 36 and 56. And your comment here is if we went beyond that. You're not talking between 30 and 36.
No, it's anything above the maximum permitted.
Okay. Another question I have, just because I couldn't figure it out, what is a upper level front porch? Because a porch is an entryway. I didn't know what that meant. You've got one of the, I'll tell you what page it's on if I find it here in a second. It was confusing to me how a front porch could be on an upper level. But
Just mostly it's a porch that's accessed from the second story.
I've seen a few of those.
The old houses had them as sleeping porches when it was hot in the summer and you didn't have AC. You would sleep out there.
okay, but all right, the old houses, I understand what you're saying, I'm just trying to get an illustration in my head. You have a porch, and then you have a porch on top of a porch.
Yeah.
But according to this, the front porch on the upper level, assuming that's a porch, I mean, a sleeping porch, I mean, anyways, assuming that's a porch, you would say the upper level would have to meet the setback, but the lower level would not have to meet the setback.
Now, there are already specified standards for the setback that the lower level would have to meet. They are allowed to project up to a certain distance within a required setback on the front facade.
Right, the lower level, the ground level.
Lower level.
Right.
But not the upper,
Has to
if
be
there is
flush.
one.
The upper level has to be flush with the facade.
I would have to comply with the required setback.
Right, so it couldn't be over the, if you had a front porch that was projecting out 10 feet, you couldn't have a porch directly over it because that wouldn't meet the setback.
Correct.
Okay, I just want to be clear what's being proposed there. Also, Tim mentioned illustrations. I would encourage that. I looked at I'm having trouble figuring out in my head the proposed corner lot setbacks. There are, I know, houses. You walk around the neighborhood and you see that the house is facing this way. They're two equal streets. One's not bigger than the other. It happens that the residence is facing this way, and to the side, they're only, 10 feet setback. The language that you've used, and I don't want to get into minutiae, I'm not sure I understand what the narrowest, I think you used the narrowest street frontage or the deeper frontage. I think an illustration would be appropriate there because I'm not getting that. Those aren't really policy issues. Those are more picky. I'd also make a comment about you've got the front-loaded garages on multi-units. I understand the sentiment there, but for every action, there's a reaction. So if you're going to say you can't enter from the front, well, people in a multifamily that don't have a big yard, they're looking for a patio or a little green space. You got to put it somewhere. So the picture you've got illustrated here, I can't see the back of the building, but I'm guessing if there is any green space or sitting area or patio, it's in the back. If you're going to have cars coming in the back, you're going to force people, if they're looking for that, to put it somewhere else, like in the front or on their front porch. So I'm just bringing it up that I'm not sure that it's always a bad thing to have a front loaded. I don't think it looks as good, but on the other hand, you're looking at an overall design of a site. So just a thought there. I agree with Commissioner Douglas and the mayor that the list of community benefit offsets should probably be expanded, and I would suggest that it be maybe less specific. For instance, LEED is, the utility of that is questionable to me, because first of all, if they come to the planning commission or the planning department with a design, you don't know if you're going to be LEED certified. That comes at the end.
Right.
So nobody knows. But expressing, energy efficient building systems above average or something, some less specific phraseology that still encourages responsible, environmentally friendly building techniques would be what I would suggest. But
Well, in that vein, you could encourage LEED attributes to get the certification. Because the certification is $25,000, $30,000, $40,000.
it costs money too.
Yeah, so if we encourage LEED attributes towards certification, we wouldn't be holding their hand in the fire to have it certified.
An example I give is in that particular continuum, I mean, maybe would you rather have a LEED certified building? Fine. Or in that case, the geography lends itself to a place that's completely has 100% green infrastructure and stormwater absorbent and everything like that. Maybe that's way better trade-off than just having a building, in this case, that's energy efficient. You can say, well, we get more benefit from having that entire property be self-contained and not, contribute to stormwater versus whatever. So there's different, you want to leave I think you're right. I don't think you want to pin the creativity to any extent. You want to be able to offer these things as voluntary things you can propose when you come to the Planning Commission or City Commission, and with the spirit of really,
Sustainability.
Yeah, moving our mission, moving the needle, and every property is unique. So whatever you can maximize in terms of the utility of making the world a little cleaner, a little better in this case, or more socially responsible maybe in another case where you offer some other benefit, senior housing or something like that. I think it's we want to keep those windows open because we want to maximize, and the way we maximize is giving each property the opportunity to be creative and leverage its natural position.
Ms. Douglas.
So it occurs to me that our goal here, one of our ideas here, is to have fewer of these projects coming through or have more projects approved by staff administratively. And we're talking about concessions that people might make. What are they going to be asking for which we need to grant concessions? I mean, if we're sitting here saying we're going to stick with the 36-foot height and the number of units and so on and so forth, what kinds of things are we routinely going to see them asking for that will immediately bring them back before the Planning Commission asking for 4 stories instead of 3 if they add a Uber pickup zone?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. If you take away, what we're doing, how do you get the, think about that one, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, as the bar moves,
Yeah.
Right.
asks in the future are going to move with them.
Yeah.
Right.
Oops. Be careful what you wish for.
Well, if I could respond in a minute, a lot of what we've drafted as far as those additional benefits, that section applies only to projects where they're, one, proposing multiple family dwellings within a zoning district where there is not a minimum required lot area. Those would be our commercial zoning districts, which is currently the case now. There's no, such as neighborhood business, general business, there's no minimum or maximum density or minimum lot area required in those. So it would apply in those districts where, one, they don't have a minimum lot area, but they are proposing a number of units that would be greater than what our revised density standards would be. Anything that falls below that, the section on those additional benefits wouldn't apply.
Right.
And still, any project proposing multiple family construction is going to be reviewed by the Planning Commission for a site plan review. It's not something we can improve administratively. But what we were trying to do is to reduce the number of PUD and conditional zoning applications we're getting, which over the last several years has been significant.
Well, and if I may add,
place?
And nothing's going to, change the plans that within all of those other zoning districts, all the other, ordinances that we need to update to be consistent with an environmental sustainability plan or what we plan to do with, making our community better to age in place. All of those things will have implications as well in each one of these pockets too. So, it will be incorporated eventually in part of, just like our stormwater ordinance, maybe now we've updated it once. We'll update it to allow green infrastructure and commercial properties, let's say, so that's not a negotiating item anymore. It's a mandate.
Yeah.
You have to be cleaner.
Either comments or questions for Doug or Tim? Where do we go from here?
Well, my suggestion would be that you take time and look through it, see if you've got any more questions or clarifications. We will address some of your comments that you brought up tonight in regards to residential and the general industrial, some of the community benefits stuff, and how we could add to that. We will look at putting together some illustrations that help you consider that. So I have a list of things that we'll attempt to address and bring it back, so you've got some of those items addressed next month. And at that point, if you're comfortable with it, you may set it for a hearing. If you're not, you still need more information. There's no rush from our end with this.
Okay. Ms. Douglas?
I guess I would say that before we get to a public hearing, get a text or a draft text so solid that it's, a candidate for a public hearing, I'd much rather have a town hall on this or just a meeting well noticed to relevant players that we're going to be talking about this and asking for their input. For example, there was the issue of cantilevered things, which architects, don't want included in their lot coverage, but we do, and I'd like to know why they feel that way. And so I would want to make sure that the staff lets us know what they're going to do to make sure that audience participates and we hear from them.
So not a public hearing, but a
before we get to a public hearing,
okay.
Yeah.
So how would we announce that? Would we advertise it?
Yeah, we could probably.
How would we?
Could have another discussion, like, put it on the agenda as we did here for an open discussion, and just make sure we let people, other than the three who are in the audience here, know that it's coming up and that we really want to hear from them.
Okay.
Like a presentation with public comment after.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good.
Would
that be after we have one more round with ourselves here?
yes, one more, bringing it back next month, and then, okay. I was going to say, I didn't know if that was enough time for next month, so, okay, got it. Okay, we don't need to take any action then, do we, Mr. Cohen? Okay. All right, then there's nothing else. We'll move on to item 3.
Item 3, we need to reschedule the March 10th Planning Commission meeting. The election, the clerk has this room in 309 reserved for training and preparation for the election in March, so it's not available. I would suggest you pick another date so that this room is available, because we don't have the ability anywhere else to have the setup that we currently have. So either moving it a week later on a Tuesday or Wednesday, or a week earlier.
A week later is better.
Later's better.
That's St. Patrick's Day.
Oh,
You might get interesting public comment.
Yeah, it's no
Serve Guinness.
a Swedish, Finnish, and Romanian, so it's no difference
Scots
to me.
Wahey.
It's the 17th. Does that
That's
work?
St. Patty's Day. If you want to do it then, it's okay with me.
man. I don't celebrate St.
Or I could do it
But I do need a motion to
on a
change the
Wednesday.
meeting date because you adopted.
Or during the
your meeting
11th?
schedule.
Is this?
It doesn't have to be a Tuesday, though, does it?
No.
I mean, if it's that week, I mean, the only thing I'm thinking is,
11th?
like, when does this room become available? Is it the, you know,
Make sure we're available.
the next day? You know, just because sometimes when things, the only thing I hesitate about is I don't know what's going to be on the March agenda, but sometimes timing's critical with commission meetings and getting stuff. And if on the 17th we have a meeting, but we have a city commission meeting on the 16th, you know, that could delay something unnecessarily, either for petitioners or for what we're trying to do. Just trying to be considerate of, you know, the fact that if we try to do it that week still, like the 11th, the next day, you know, does that?
Nothing coming out of the 10th is going to make the city commission meeting on the 16th because the city commission has its own deadlines for submissions.
Yeah, that's true.
So
there's nothing on the 10th or that week that's going to make that 16th meeting, so.
is the week of March 9th, are
The
there other
9th.
dates available?
The 11th could we do, of March?
The 11th may still be a problem if the clerk hasn't cleaned this room out yet.
Right.
Okay,
And the 12th is CBA.
so that's not going to work.
The 18th, there's a DDA meeting in here at 4 o'clock, but that shouldn't interrupt. The 16th is the city commission meeting.
I can do the 17th or 18th.
The 12th is the zoning board appeals meeting in here, so we can't do the 12th.
I like the 18th, just because I know my kids and I got stuff going on in St.
I was going
Patrick's
to say,
Day.
for the 18th as well, there's a band concert that popped up on my
Oh, okay.
On the 18th?
on the 17th.
Oh, 17th,
Yeah,
okay.
and I just think for petitioners too, if they, I mean, there are some Irish people in our community that like to have a lot of fun. Me, I like to hang out with my
Colleagues here?
kids and do their little school thing, so.
Yeah.
Amateur night.
18th?
I can do the 18th.
Works for me?
Or frankly, you can cancel it. Everybody will just get backed up to, but that's up to you guys. You can cancel that meeting and we'll just move everybody to April.
What would
Yeah, but
the,
that
Is there a lot on the agenda?
That potentially,
We already have one application for one site plan, but the deadline isn't until another 2 weeks.
but then that conceivably pushes this discussion back
Oh, that's
further. 18th.
let's do the 18th.
Nobody's objecting to the 18th. I'm not hearing
fine.
that.
18th? I would like a motion to move it to the 18th since you adopted your.
Is there a motion?
schedule.
So moved.
Support?
Support.
Support by the mayor. All those in favor for March 18th, same time, 7 o'clock, Tim?
Yes.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Meeting's been moved.
March 18th.
Now, I hope I remember.
We'll send out a reminder.
Okay.
The other item I have is I did provided a handout from the interim city manager / city attorney. And Char Douglas may know more about this than I do in terms of the senior service and aging in place group sessions or work sessions. The various departments that are listed at the bottom, based on topic, are asked to provide staff to these work groups. And there also was a request that the various committees that may be involved potentially have 2 committee members that might want to assign to do that work group. And as you'll see, the domain or the work group topic would be housing, and the committee is listed as the Planning Commission. So I can't volunteer you, so if someone wants to participate, please let me know.
When is
But
it?
if I may, so even though the housing domain or subject is tagged for the Planning Commission, the work groups covering transportation and outdoor spaces and buildings will all have relevance to planners. I encourage all of you and ask all of you to sign up to be part of one of these work groups. And what will happen is, starting probably in March, there'll be an orientation for each of the work groups with information from focus groups and a quantitative study that we've been doing and feedback from subject matter experts. And then each work group will develop an action plan over 2, 3, 4 meetings to make Royal Oak age-friendly in that subject matter area. And I mean, the knowledge that we have here, again, not just in housing, but in other areas as well, would be, I think, immensely valuable. So, Mr. Twing, what I can do is to send you a link to send to the commission where you can sign up for work groups that you're interested in.
And there's preset dates or not yet?
No, not yet.
Oh,
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, anything else on that topic?
Nope.
Item 4?
The next two are simply informational items. 2019 annual report just kind of gives a history of what the Planning Commission received and acted on and how the various breakdown. There's no action necessary. And then item 5 is again, informational in terms of administrative approvals that have occurred.
Any questions on 4 or 5, Ms. Douglas?
So it seems to me that a year-ish ago, we asked to hold a joint meeting between the Planning Commission and the Board of Zoning Appeals, Zoning Board of Appeals.
I remember that.
And we didn't, and I think we should, especially given the zoning changes that we're proposing here in housing. I think they would benefit from learning more about that. And I also know that there are decisions that we make, recommending variances that we send downstream to the zoning board, and I want to know how they feel about that. I mean, what we're sending them reasonable, unreasonable? Where are there areas of conflict where some changes to our zoning ordinance or other related ordinance would make life easier for the CBA? I don't know that we can get 100%. I mean, finding a date where everyone on the Planning Commission and everyone on the ZBA can attend is probably a pipe dream, but let's see if we can find a reasonable date when a reasonable number of people can attend. And can we get that done in the next 3 months?
We'll try to do it, get it going. What would you consider reasonable attendance? So 3 members from each at least, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That way there's not a quorum.
I would make it a work
Yeah.
session. Make it a work session.
Matter if there's a quorum.
I guess it's a publicly posted
Yeah,
meeting.
publicly.
Right.
Right.
Right. And the only thing I would other point out, though, is when you approve a site plan with a contingency, it's subject to the ZBA action, you are not recommending approval. It's simply a condition of that site plan approval, and if they don't get it, the site plan's null and void. So there is no recommendation from this body that goes to the ZBA. So just for clarification, for out there too.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Twing on administrative approvals? Okay. Not seeing it, then we are adjourned.
Thank you. Nice work.
Good job.